What is up, Dynasty Leaguers? Welcome into another episode of Drafting Lessons, the DLF TV show where I grab a guest every week and we mock a Dynasty startup, rookie mock, or now since we're in late July, getting into August here, a redraft mock draft. So we're going to continue with those redrafts since we're moving into the 2020 season. News actually just broke. We're recording this on Friday. It looks like that we're going to have some sort of a training camp, and that's good news for a 2020 season. So these redraft mocks are really going to come in handy as we move in through the rest of August into September. So I said a couple weeks ago, whenever I was saying that we were moving into redrafts, that I was going to grab some big names to come on here. And I went all the way up to CBS's own Ben Gretch. Ben, how's it going, man?
It's going good, dude. I don't know that, I'm not big of a name, but I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. I mean, CBS, man, that carries some weight with it.
Sure.
Yeah, that is awesome. So I appreciate you coming on here and joining me today, Ben. We're going to be running through a 13-round PPR redraft mock draft. It's pretty standard everything. It's one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, and then 6 bench spots gets us to 13. So I hit the random button before we started recording here. You got the 3 spot, I got the 10 spot. And before I hit this begin draft button, is there any general strategies or maybe just overall tendencies that you kind of have been noticing for this year for redraft? Maybe that's draft slot dependent based on how players in ADP falls. Is there anything that you've been finding for this year for 2020, maybe specifically to your 103 spot?
Yeah, I don't know that it would be specific to my 103 spot, although there's certainly an element of it. But a lot of my redraft strategy just bases around the fact that there is so much depth, young depth at receiver in the middle rounds. And this is obviously something that a lot of people have talked about. I don't think it's probably a shocking conclusion to come to. But from about, late round 3 through, for me, it's through like round 8. I just want to take so many round 8 or even later, but there's just so many receivers I want to take until we hit about like wide receiver 40. And then, there's always late round receivers you like, but I do think there's a pretty substantial drop off at a certain point, somewhere in the wide receiver 35 to 45 range. You get into what are probably going to be more flyers than some guys that I think have some real legit upside and I'm excited about. So I think I'm trying to hammer wide receiver in those ranges, and it overlaps with an article I wrote last year at CBS and in our magazine and everything about the running back dead zone, where that's a range where historically there's not a lot of upside at the running back position. You're not going to find a lot of guys that get top, elite seasons, top 3, hit certain benchmarks that I used. It was like 250 PPR points or a certain amount of points per game or different benchmarks that I used. It's hard to find those in that range after about 15 to 20 running backs go, and you get into those those like the back half of the 32 teams, you get into the starters that we're not as comfortable with. That's just a lot of guys that I think get pushed up because we project these really big workloads. But I think that's one of the biggest issues with projections generally, and I love projections, I do them, but projections can get you caught with some running backs that, you have to project someone to kind of be the lead ball carrier for some teams. And then they wind up as coming out as like a 5th round pick or a 4th round pick. But that range historically has really, really struggled in drafts. So I don't hit running backs there. I want to hit receivers there, which means I'm probably going to try to take running backs early at 103. Definitely. I think Michael Thomas is worth the pick, but I won't take him there because of this whole structure.
Interesting. Yeah. That's basically, that, like you said, that's not really a new idea or strategy that's been talked about, even for this year, but also kind of in a couple years past. So I'm just really interested to see how our 2 rosters are going to end up so much different, I think, because I think where I'm at 110, it's going to be the latest that anybody is drafted from in this drafting lessons in the past 3 weeks that I've been doing these redraft mocks. So it's going to be entirely new for me personally to see kind of how this works from the 10 spot. From the 3 spot, I think it's going to be really cool to kind of see exactly what you just said with, going running back early and then hammering out those wide receivers in those mid rounds. I think is a fantastic strategy. And then filling in the quarterback and tight end as well. So I think it's going to be really fun, really cool to see where our two teams end up at the end of this. And I think we should just get this going and get this started and see what happens.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So begin draft. And
Saquon 101. Ooh. All right, so I figured I would be taking Kamara there. I have him as the number 3 in PPR, especially. I think the touchdowns are going to bounce back. He had 31 in his first 2 seasons, only 6 last year, and the Saints running backs as a whole had a huge drop off in touchdowns. I expect their running back touchdowns to bounce back, and the way that Kamara was getting used with Murray, particularly before his high ankle sprain, he might have his first 200 carry season as well. Which I mean, I think he could have his best year this year.
So it's interesting because I think a lot of people would just automatically slot in Zeke to that 3 spot. Is that a big enough difference for you between Kamara and Zeke to always take Kamara over him in the 3 spot?
Yep. Yeah, I think a lot of people do. I definitely know plenty of people who do. For me, it's a tier break. I mean, I have Zeke a whole tier behind, and I know that sounds aggressive. I have some concerns with Zeke from just workload and age. I know he's not old, but he's 25, and we do see guys fall off at a certain point at the running back position, and it typically comes out of nowhere. We've seen it with David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell and Todd Gurley and so many guys. Zeke doesn't really profile that way. He's been phenomenally healthy and it's just kind of been a workhorse since he was in college. So I don't necessarily think that's true, but one of these years, whether it's this year or next year or 2 years or 3 years from now, at some point he's probably going to slow down. And so I start to worry about that a little bit around age 25. I'm not as concerned about Kamara, which is kind of odd because he actually had a more prominent injury last year. And then the bigger point, though, is the receiving in PPR especially. I tend to value the combination of receptions and touchdown potential as like the key to upside. Zeke has had solid reception numbers. I don't think he will he has in the past. I don't think he will continue to in 2020 necessarily. They have so much firepower at wide receiver. And I think Tony Pollard probably deserves to see the field a little bit and might on passing down. So Elliott, to me, doesn't really profile as a high catch guy anymore. Kamara, I think, has 100 catch potential pretty much every season. So that combination where I think Kamara can match an elite back's touchdowns because of the way the Saints offense runs and get really high receptions, to me, gives him, a profile that's kind of similar to McCaffrey. It's just obviously not as dominant as McCaffrey's.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think a lot more people are getting smarter to the PPR upside and the pass catching upside for fantasy football. And I mean, Kamara, one of the best pass catching backs in the league. I like that a lot, especially with everything that you said with your concerns about Zeke and his pass catching upside. Even though that offense is still going to be very prolific and dynamic, there's a lot of mouths to feed still.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on a lot of the stuff that you said there too. So I just think it's fun to always talk about these players kind of differently. I feel like a lot of times in the early rounds, people just get so autopiloted on, grabbing this guy in just the order, right? And
I do think it's pretty, I feel pretty strongly about that, about having Kamara here over Zeke, but I don't think that's something that a lot of people have. So I agree with you. I think it's an interesting one to discuss for sure.
Yeah, so I'm on the clock here at the 10 spot, which is, I was kind of worried about what was going to come back to me just in terms of the first 9 picks. 8 of them were running backs outside of Michael Thomas at the 105. Zeke actually fell all the way to the 7, which is really interesting there. So here, I can go through a different selection of all these wide receivers that are left. Devontae and Tyreek Hill, who both have wide receiver 1 overall potential, as does, I think, Julio too. The running backs are still really interesting, and I'm actually going to go the running back direction because, like you said, like the wide receivers can get pushed down so hard in these middle rounds that if you miss out on running backs here, you're drafting guys like Devin Singletary or that type of mold in the mid rounds to try to fill out your lineup. So I'm going with the guy that I'm high on. I think a lot of other people are definitely high on for sure. In Josh Jacobs here, I think that if he can get any semblance of a pass catching role, that he could be potentially a top 5 back, on top of what he already does in the running game. And 13 games last year, 1,300 total yards. He was an animal. And, I think a lot of that was due to him being held back just as a rookie, just, not wanting to, let him go entirely and just getting him accustomed to the NFL. So I think in year 2, if the Raiders offense can take a step forward as well, too, with all the new weapons that they drafted, I think Jacobs can be primed for a breakout 2020 season. And I think that he's gonna be a really good floor guy, but also has a huge opportunity for ceiling.
I think that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I have him projected for the 3rd most rushing yards in the NFL. I mean,
Nice.
I don't really project like player injuries too much, but I expect he'll get plenty of carries, and assuming that he's on the field, he'll run for a ton of yards. I think he's a very good runner and will be efficient. But the reception side is kind of the concern. But you're right. I mean, He has a floor, and if that does materialize, there's certainly a ceiling. My concern is like all their backups are pass catchers. They brought back Jalen Richard. They drafted Lynn Bowden. They signed Devontae Booker, who we know can catch passes and play on passing downs as well. So I'm a little concerned that passing role will materialize, but I agree with you. It's a high floor pick for sure.
Yeah. So that's where it leads me into my next pick here. I was really hoping that Nick Chubb would actually slide back to me. I'm pretty high on him. I'm pretty confident in the Kareem Hunt thing being a little overblown in terms of how he impacts Nick Chubb's workload and his role. But that's kind of a different conversation, a different topic we don't need to get into now. So I'm looking here, and my biggest issue. So I'm looking at like Austin Eckler at running back, but Tyreek Hill is still there as well too, who I think could have a phenomenal season with Pat Mahomes, obviously the half Billy man, and just like Tyreek Hill's overall potential as like the wide receiver 1, leading the NFL in yards potentially. Huge splash play potential every single week. But man, I always think about all those wide receivers that I can get in the mid rounds, like you said, and I feel like we've said this already. We're like 10 minutes into this. We've said this like 10 times.
Yeah.
All those wide receivers. So
I will say, if I can just
go for it.
On it. I have Hill number 2 at wide receiver over Adams, over Hopkins, who already went in the draft. I agree with everything you just said. And if you look at his game log last year, he had 2 games where he played fewer than 20% of the snaps. Week 1 when he broke his collarbone, and it was like week 10 or 12 or something like that when they were playing the Chargers in Mexico City. He left that game really early. He played 19 total snaps in those 2 games. If you pull those 2 games and then you pace the rest of the games he played out, his line looks a lot like 2018, where he was really strong. He was the wide receiver 1, I believe, in non-PPR. And an elite receiver. He's basically done that 2 years in a row, except for the fact that he played these 2 small games, and it doesn't show up in his points per game totals because of those 2 low snap games where he got hurt. But I agree with you, that upside with Mahomes is just massive.
Well, I'm gonna take him then. Yeah,
that's what I would do personally.
Yeah, I was looking at Eckler, and I was like, if I could get like his pass catching upside to like comp with and pair with Josh Jacobs, I think that would be a really nice duo. But like Tyreek Hill's upside is just massive. I don't think I could pass that up. And it's nice to see that Eckler went another 4 picks later, and I did feel like I would have reached for him more so than I would have for Tyreek, who I think is actually kind of a value there at 203.
Yeah, I think he is a value there. But I agree. Eckler was certainly the best running back on the board there for me. He was the last one in a tier that included all these guys in the later part of the first round and early part of the second. And so I'm going to go to wide receiver as well. And for me, this pick is really clear. It's not for everyone else, though, and it's going to be down the list a little ways. But this is where dynasty leaguers are going to, are going to be excited. But I'm extremely high on DJ Moore, and probably I could get him in the 3rd here. But and especially that since I'm, drafting against a bot, I certainly could have got him in the 3rd. But I want to draft this like I would normally draft a team, and I take Moore in the 2nd round in this spot because I have him as my wide receiver 5. I think he's going to be phenomenal. He was, I believe, wide receiver 7 or wide receiver 8 before he got hurt. After 6 snaps. I mean, similar thing to Tyreek Hill. After 6 snaps in week 16, it cost me a couple championships because I had him everywhere last year too. But if you throw that game out, similar to Hill, the guy only played 6 snaps. He paced for basically 150 target, 100 catch season. paced very favorably to Michael Thomas's second season. And Michael Thomas was 2 years older and playing with Drew Brees. DJ Moore was a 22-year-old playing with Kyle Allen. So this guy's going to be a star. I mean, I feel very confident in his ability, and I have him that high. I'm projecting him to be a target hog with Bridgewater, who I think is a perfect complement for him.
Yeah, I'm honestly, I love DJ Moore so much, coming from, my Dynasty perspective as well too. Like, he's like a top 3 wide receiver in Dynasty for me personally. And I mean, like, I just think he's gonna smash so hard with Teddy Bridgewater, like you said, and just that being the focal point of that offense outside of Christian McCaffrey is just gonna, I mean, his upside is through the roof. If he can find some more trips into the end zone, that's just going to like boost his ceiling so much higher, because I think he only scored like 4 or 5 times last year. And he's not really a red zone threat. So a lot of those touchdowns are long touchdowns. If he can, continue to do that, but maybe find himself more inside the red zone, being productive in there, I think that he could have a fantastic opportunity to really smash here. And I mean, the only thing that I really wanted to ask you, and I see that you took George Kittle, which we can get into that, but I was wondering if you were going to go the tight end route in the second round there, because I've seen a lot of people, especially in previous drafting lessons, that has kind of been a spot for Kelsey and Kittle, and then grabbing a wide receiver in the third round. So I'm wondering if DJ Moore is that high ahead of a tier for you, above Kenny Golladay and Mike Evans, compared to where Kelsey and Kittle are much more closer, and that's why you're fine with passing on them and trying to see if one of those tight ends was going to fall back to you, which it actually ended up doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. In my overall rankings, I actually have Kittle 1 spot ahead of Moore, and I have Kelsey further up, and I have Godwin 1 spot behind Moore. I think that's a little bit crazy for some people, but I think if you really dig into Godwin's efficiency, which should probably regress a little bit this year, and everything you said about DJ Moore's touchdowns, which he had basically the same number of receptions in college as he's had so far in the pros. I think he has 6 pro touchdowns. He had like 17 in college at the same number. So I don't think he is incapable of scoring touchdowns. I just think it's been, a small sample basically. I think if we dig into it, the Moore versus Godwin debate's really close. I end up leaning towards Moore actually. So, but yeah, I have all those guys really close that you asked about, and probably in hindsight, I would take a tight end there sometimes. I wasn't really like planning that out super close, and I guess I wasn't really considering the 2 QBs went and Kelsey hadn't gone yet. I might have taken Kelsey there too. I think the tight ends are essentially late first or early second round values that get pushed down because of construction. People know there's a lot of late round tight ends that they like this year, and they don't want to lock themselves into a onesie position that early. And so, and I don't disagree with that necessarily. I don't really like doing that at the turn either when there's really good running backs and wide receivers available. So they get kind of pushed down for reasons that aren't really related to their value, though. And I think those guys are that much better than the rest of the tight ends, that they belong. And I can't let Kittle slip any further than 303.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's been a pretty consistent build in the first 3-4 picks here, is going running back in the first 4 spots, obviously, and then grabbing George Kittle somewhere in that second or early third round range, and pairing him with either another running back or growing into that wide receiver group like you did. So it's been a pretty good build overall, and I mean, you're starting out on fire with Kamara, DJ Moore, and George Kittle. So
yeah, I love picking at the top of the draft this year. I mean, that's such a nice start.
Hold on, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, hold on. It's kind of turned into a telemarketer.
Oh, nice.
I tell my parents every day, I'm like, why do we even have that landline? It's just telemarketer city. Oh well, editing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm up here on the clock, 3:10. I went running back and wide receiver here, and just to kind of give a lay of the land, we're looking at like Fournette, Le'Veon, Juju are all there, Chris Carson, OBJ, and Amari Cooper at wide receiver. There's Mark Andrews still at tight end. It's a really weird. I feel like I'm in the middle of like tiers here, with especially at wide receiver. There's a lot of guys, and we start getting into these mid rounds where a lot of guys seem like are all in the same tier of like 10, 12 wide receivers. That is really weird to kind of, pick and choose just one, maybe two of these guys. I struggled with that in Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah.
And it really hurt.
I've heard that refrain commonly. And I feel the same way. I mean, it's definitely it's like an embarrassment of riches. The way I look at it, and this is why my strategy is built around that, is like I want to get as many of them as I can. I think that the thing you can fall into is like, oh, there's so many, they'll come back to me, and then you go to a different position, and then you don't actually wind up with that strong of a wide receiver core. You know what I mean? Like, because it's a hard decision to make, so you don't make it, kind of.
Right.
And I mean, that's not to say that if you went to a different position, that would be wrong, but I just think that is a thing that people can fall into, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. So man, I still feel like I'm a little early on grabbing some of these wide receivers here, at least at the end of the third, and already having Tyreek. I think I'm solid at wide receiver where I'm at, that I don't have to grab my wide receiver 2 at this specific 310. And I'm looking at waiting until see what comes back to me at the 4-3. What I am going to do is go running back here. And I really, really like Chris Carson. Every single year, he always seems like an undervalued player, especially among his other running backs and stuff that are being drafted around him in the same ADP. And I mean, going between him and Le'Veon and Fournette, 2 guys who went just after him, who were also available at my pick. I mean, I just think Carson is safer in terms of not so much workload when you compare Carson to Le'Veon, but Carson to Fournette. I think Carson's safer. And I think, just Carson being on a better team, better offense is really what sets him apart for me between him and Le'Veon Bell, who, Le'Veon can have like some of the biggest workload of the year at the end of the year. But, if that offense isn't really going to be moving, isn't really going to be pushing the ball downfield, getting good opportunities inside the red zone, I kind of worry about Le'Veon repeating what he did last year, which I know was still a mid RB2, but it didn't help you on a weekly basis, where I think Carson can have, that same floor, but also have higher weekly ceiling, given that, the Seattle Seahawks offense is significantly better, get more opportunities inside the red zone for him to score. And he adds, some of that pass catching upside as well, too, being one of the main primary pass catching backs in Seattle. So I'm pretty good with him and pretty comfortable with him as more of a safety net as my RB2 compared to Le'Veon and Fournette.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Would you have done something differently?
Well, yeah. I mean, these are kind of the backs that I tend to avoid. I probably would have went wide receiver here and been really thin at RB2. So that, I mean, I don't think it's wrong, but it's just, I mean, for me, I would have probably taken Juju there. And I was considering him at 303. I'm pretty high on him. So I think he'll bounce back. I still think very highly of him long term. So that's where I would have went. But as far as the running backs, like I can't disagree with your take, because I don't take any of these guys, dude. Like, honestly, I don't waste a lot of energy thinking about it, which is not probably the right philosophy, but it is kind of my mindset.
Cool. I mean, I probably would have, if it was my wide receiver pick, I would have gone Amari there. Even though I am a Steelers fan, I'm a huge Juju fan as well too. I consistently think with him, I'm like, man, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if I'm way higher on him and Juju isn't the 2018 Juju, but he's not 2019. He's somewhere in the middle, which would make him worth this pick. But like, I still kind of like hesitate whenever I go to click his name, and then I can fall back and grab one of these other wide receivers, like I said, in like this tier of like 10 million wide receivers here. That, one of those guys that I feel like is kind of in that same Juju range is Otto Beckham Jr. for me, who I think the Browns offense is going to have a bounce back year as well too. I think Baker's going to be a lot better. I think OBJ, even Matt Harmon, when you look at his reception perception, like OBJ did not do well last year compared to previous years with his reception perception. And Matt Harmon's like, yeah, there's obviously something very wrong here. Like he was obviously playing hurt, didn't score a lot, even though he had a lot of opportunities inside the red zone too. I just think that whole offense is going to be much better, much more efficient with Kevin Stefanski and Bill Callahan, designing the plays and calling the offense and stuff. And I think it's going to be a bounce back year for OBJ. Maybe not to what we saw him at his peak in New York, but I think he can definitely return value on a wide receiver 2, a solid wide receiver 2. And that's why I'm comfortable with grabbing him and Chris Carson versus, Juju and one other wide receiver here in this tier. And that's kind of where the difference was for me at this turn for my team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For me here, I get into a really challenging decision because anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that I love AJ Brown, and this is a lot later than I would even typically take him. I would tend to take him. I'm fine with Odell. I like Odell. I have Brown higher. So if I was in your spot in the back of the draft, and so the early part of the fourth, I'm probably taking AJ Brown in that spot. But Ridley's one of only 11 receivers that actually have ranked higher than him, because I think Ridley's in a phenomenal spot to explode. We know there's going to be a ton of passing volume because of Dirk Cutter. We know that passing offense is going to be very, very concentrated now that Mohamed Sanu's gone. Russell Gage isn't much of a number 3 receiver. Hayden Hurst, at best, you're hoping he's going to be what Austin Hooper was last year. So that still probably would leave plenty of targets for both Julio and Ridley. I think Ridley's this year's Godwin. I think he's going to be an absolute monster, and frankly a top 12 wide receiver. Like I haven't projected there. It's not like an upside thing with Brown. I think there's certainly upside for that, but probably my baseline projection for him has him just outside of that, even though I'm very optimistic on him. But Ridley, the offense is just so much better that I'm going to go there.
Yeah. No, I love it. I mean, everybody loves Calvin Ridley.
And AJ Brown almost made it back, but he did not.
that would have been awesome to grab that upside with both Ridley and AJ Brown. Would have been nuts.
I would have taken him in a snap if I would have got him to come back around there.
Yeah. So I really like Ridley, and I think that he is, as your wide receiver 2 here with like phenomenal upside. I think you can have a safety net in DJ Moore, who has floor and ceiling, and then Ridley is just going to come in here and be potentially, I think, a back end wide receiver 1. I don't know if people realize that if Ridley had played 16, his 16 game pace was a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 12 last year.
His numbers were like right on line with his rookie season, but he played 3 fewer games. So he certainly took a huge step forward. And then especially after the Sanu trade, and you look at the late season layout, his targets per game and his production per game was much better than earlier in the season. And that's what we're looking at for 2020, is that type of setup where there's not as much competition. So I feel very confident that he's gonna have a big season.
I love it.
I'm going wide receiver again. I guess this is we have a flex at least. There's only 2 wide receivers, so this is kind of an aggressive strategy in a league where you only start 2 and have a flex. But I like to be receiver heavy in this range. For me, this decision comes down to Tyler Lockett and Stephon Diggs, who I'm incredibly high on. He's a lot lower for a lot of people. But I'm going to lean towards Lockett here, and probably based on his rank, I might end up with Diggs in the next round. Who knows? But I like Lockett over Metcalf, who went ahead of him. I just think that long-term rapport with Wilson is really strong. And Metcalf was good as a rookie and has plenty of physical tools, but some of the data on him, like if you look at Player Profiler, they grade target accuracy. His target accuracy was really strong, and then his true catch rate, if you look at just catchable passes, was outside the top 100 receivers. So I kind of feel like he already got high-level Russell Wilson play last year. And if he's going to take a step forward in year 2, it's going to have to be his own production, because he didn't always make the most of the opportunities. I think Russell Wilson sort of carried him to a big rookie season, as opposed to people looking at it as if, well, look how good he was as a rookie. Imagine what he can be. He's tied to Russell Wilson. And, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that either. I think there's plenty of upside with him, but he's going to have to play better when you really dig into the data, because Wilson was already good enough last year for him to probably have been better than he was. So Lockett is a guy we've had multiple seasons of a connection with Wilson, and I just love that combination.
I mean, the efficiency pair between the two is just something that is amazing to watch, both as just a regular fan of the NFL and, Russell Wilson, but then also as fantasy analysts, like Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson, that combination and that connection is just, I mean, like you said, it's so strong, and you can't really replace that with with a lot of other wide receivers and their quarterbacks and stuff. And I mean, even I think a lot of people get really hung up on the low passing volume for the Seattle Seahawks offense, but just year over year, that offense is just so efficient, and Russell Wilson is just so good that he just elevates his wide receivers up with him. And Tyler Lockett being, his wide receiver one, at least for another year, maybe two. I think a lot of people, myself included, are high on DK Metcalf taking over that spot. But I mean, Lockett's the guy right now. He's the one doing it. I mean, he's going to be the guy who grabs potentially 1,100 plus yards, 8, 9, 10 touchdowns. He's Russell Wilson's guy. I'm in on it.
Yep.
Yeah. So here at my 5'10" pick, I'm still looking at these wide receivers here. I'm with you grabbing these wide receivers in this mid range because, I mean, just to give a lay of the land for the running backs, Mostert, DeAndre Swift, who I still like, but it still kind of feels early. Damian Williams, James White, Darius Geis, J.K. Dobbins, it's not very appealing, especially when you look at the other wide receivers here. Like Keenan Allen, Cortland Sutton. I was really hoping that Terry McLaurin was going to fall to me. He's a guy that I like a lot. But I think what I'm going to go here, I should take Diggs because you want him, but that would be mean, and I'm not going to do that.
No, I don't think I could take another receiver in this setup. I gotta probably get a running back at some point.
I wouldn't. Honestly, for me, I'm taking Cortland Sutton here, and not Diggs. I'm not really high on Diggs, just because I'm not uber excited about that offense in terms of the passing offense. And I mean, we were talking about people getting hung up on Seattle's low passing volume, but their high efficiency. Buffalo has just as low of volume, but the efficiency is really spotty, and it's not really there with Josh Allen not being, obviously as refined of a passer and obviously not as good as Russell Wilson. So that really makes me worried about Stephon Diggs. And yeah, I know that last year that Smokey Brown was wide receiver 20, I think, at the end of the year. So he was there as a wide receiver too, but those weeks just really seemed like they were just built around one long bomb touchdown for a majority of his explosions, which Diggs is going to do. And we look at what Diggs did last year with Minnesota. That was kind of the same scenario. So I'm not really in on that, versus where Cortland Sutton, I think, could be more of a stereotypical wide receiver one for his offense, more of a target hog, even with Jerry Jeudy, even with KJ Hamler, Noah Fant, all those guys, Melvin Gordon being added to the backfield. And I think that, those guys are actually more beneficial to him in the sense that he's not going to get double covered as much, and he can win more of those one-on-one opportunities, even with Drew Lock, throwing him the ball. We don't really know what he is, but right. I think there's upside there.
Yeah, sure. I love Sutton the player. I wish they would have addressed the backup QB position. It's kind of weird to be out on someone because of a backup quarterback position, but they're so confident in Drew Lock that they only brought in Jeff Driscoll this offseason when there were tons of more established quarterbacks they could have acquired. And what if, we don't know about Lock. He was 4-1 late, as his fans love to point out, but those 4 wins, 3 of them were at home. I don't think he threw 30 passes in any of those games. It was very well set up schedule-wise for him to succeed. And even after Flacco got hurt, they went to Brandon Allen for 3 games to set that up for Lock, to kind of give him a soft landing and give him some home games against some inferior defenses. And yeah, you look good in that small sample, but it's just a tough thing to trust for 16 games. And if he struggles, there's a lot of mouths to feed in Denver. I feel like that offense could almost tank, which would be, there's so much talent there, but it would just be problematic if he's not good, because what are they going to do? They're not going to go to Jeff Driscoll. So I wish they would have addressed that, and it would have made me feel a lot more confident in Sutton, because I do think he is easily the cream of the crop in that. I mean, maybe not easily. Jerry Jeudy's very good too, and so is Noah Fant. But I think Sutton is very clearly the number one.
Yeah, it almost reminds you of shades of what we saw from Allen Robinson in his situation back, just a few years ago, where he's so much better than everybody else there, but that quarterback situation isn't able to kind of boost him higher than where he's able to get himself, Yep. So it's scary for him, and just in terms of, like you said, not addressing the quarterback position, and I'm worried that Locke is going to do enough to like kind of take them out of a high draft pick to where they're not going to be able to grab one of the top quarterbacks in next year's class. And without trading in, obviously, but like I'm worried that he's going to be like just good enough that they might just hang on to him for another year and see if he can take another step forward. And then we're in the same situation again next year.
There's so much talent. Hamler's great too. This is an offense that needs good quarterback play.
Yeah. We don't need to talk about KJ. I went to Penn State. I watched KJ play. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean he's the underrated one certainly in this whole group for Dynasty leaguers. Yeah,
for sure. So we'll move on here to my pick 6'3". I mean, man, I don't like drafting at the back here because I feel like I'm in the middle of tiers of everything. And what it really wants, and really what I think I'm going to do is actually, I feel like it's a little early, but I'm going to dip into the tight ends here, and I'm going to grab Evan Ingram, who I think can have, if he can stay healthy, I think he'll solidify himself as a top 4, if not better, tight end. Just because, I mean, last year you saw he was over 8 targets per game in the games that he did play with Daniel Jones. I think that offense is like sneaky good and like sneaky high caliber with the weapons that it has, even though that they don't have like one wide receiver one or one alpha wide receiver. It's just a bunch of really good guys. But Ingram can still be the focal point of that offense in the passing game, like we saw last year. And if he can just stay healthy, I think he can be a monster. And I'm worried that I took a reach. I wanted Darren Waller instead. I'd much rather have Waller than Evan Ingram just for safety.
I have Ingram ranked higher. I have him as my tight end 5. Yeah, so I like everything you just said about him. Here, I got an interesting choice because we're only starting 2 receivers. So I'm already at my flex at receiver. I don't mind taking a bench receiver this early. It's something I actually do fairly frequently, just because I think the later round running backs, kind of those zero ID RB principles, like they have the best potential to just gain a ton of value just purely circumstantially. If somebody gets hurt ahead of them, obviously a wide receiver, it can't happen as quickly because there's multiple wide receivers on a team. If Julio goes down, then Ridley steps up as the number 1, and then the next guy moves up the ladder. At running back, you can just jump up there in value, and especially this year where we don't know what's going to happen with COVID-19 and everything. I just feel like a lot of the later round running backs, it's okay to have a lot of these guys because a lot of them are going to get some spot starts or some opportunity this year. It feels like so.
Right.
I don't mind. I don't necessarily want to buy into guaranteed workloads at a very opportunity-heavy position like running back because I don't know that there's going to be much we can guarantee this year. Mm-hmm. So that's the one position I think that gets influenced in my draft strategy because of all this. I am looking at a couple running backs here. I mean, Damian Williams I think would be a very good pick here for my team and the way that I've kind of built it. And there's a strong possibility he could be their number 1 to start the season with Clyde Edwards-Helaire out, but I'm also looking at Deshaun Watson as the last QB in this top 6, and I think he's going to be pretty darn good this year too. I think his talent level is high enough that even losing Hopkins, he can be a playmaker and perform. And in this type of a league where it's a shallower starting lineup, I'm more likely to maybe take a quarterback in the 6th round because I want a difference maker there. There's only 8, or 7. What is this? 4, 5, 6, 7 starting spots in this lineup. So. That he's a tough one to pass here. I think I am going to go Damian Williams though. Oh. And I'm probably not going to get Watson. Yeah, I'm not. So now I just wind up waiting till the very end at quarterback. It's just kind of the way that I've played that position.
Right.
But I think I was more concerned about the drop off at running back after Williams. I feel pretty good about Williams in the first part of the season, and I'm comfortable with him as my RB2 at this point, especially after guys like Mostert, for example, who I don't feel very comfortable with. He doesn't catch enough passes. Right. So I'm going to go back to receiver, and I'm going to take Marquise Brown. Where's he at? Or did he go?
He got taken at the turn.
And then I'm going to take either Tyler Boyd or Fuller or Gallup. I like them all so much. In this roster, I'm going to take Fuller because basically I want the guy with the high ceiling, and I think he has probably the the monster ceiling to be the number one for Watson if Watson is still as good as I'm hoping and all of those things. And Fuller is just the clear number one in a situation where Cooks and Cobb just haven't had a chance to work with Watson enough, and it just plays out that way. If that happens, Fuller might be worth slotting into my starting lineup ahead of some of these other three receivers that I have that are very good, depending on matchups and whatnot. As much as I like Boyd and Gallup, I don't know where there would be a lot of scenarios where I would start them over the other three receivers I have. So I felt like a chance to take a swing at a high upside guy.
Yeah, I think what you just said there really answered my question that I had in my head was, Fuller versus Brandon Cooks as that wide receiver one in Houston. And, you said about how your roster construction, looking at your wide receivers, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Lockett, and then Will Fuller as your wide receiver four. I am in complete agreement with you that if Will Fuller is healthy and is out there playing, he's the only guy on that team right now with connection with Deshaun Watson already, and with, how COVID is going to impact the training camp or whatever. Like, Will Fuller is going to be the guy that I think Watson looks to a lot more than Cooks and Cobb and everybody else, at least initially. And, some of those games, like you said, if he smashes and he starts, being consistent every week and staying healthy, you might be looking at him over Calvin Ridley as your wide receiver too. In some cases, like I think
you said about running backs and not knowing who's going to miss time. I mean, we should expect that at receiver too. So
right,
one of my starters could have to miss a few games, because they unfortunately test positive, and boom, now I have Fuller in that. I have an explosive backup.
Yeah, that's, and I mean, like an every week kind of flex play who can just grab you some upside. I love Will Fuller this year. And I think everything that you said about your roster construction with it really impacting your pick there, I love it. I love it a lot. So looking at my pick here, I'm actually surprised. I wasn't expecting Darius Geis to make it back to me after I made my Evan Ingram pick. I felt like at that time in the 6th round, it was too early for Geis, and I wasn't expecting him to come back. But I feel like that's a pretty easy pick for me in the 7th round, just because he has that upside to be the Reds. I can't say it anymore. The Washington football team's RB1. So just the upside that he brings if he can stay healthy. And I think I heard, I think it was Matthew Betts was talking about it with the fantasy footballers. Maybe I don't remember if it was him or not. Somebody was talking about it, and the fantasy footballers talked about it, how like his injury last year, the MCL injury, was actually a good thing for Geis because it caught his ACL injury before he could do any more damage to like his ACL again. Right. And that's one of the things that a lot of people are worried about with ACL injuries, is coming back too early and then injuring yourself again, which I mean happened with the MCL, but it gives him more time to recover from the ACL. The MCL is an easier injury to recover from too. So just like having a whole nother year to just fully, get healthy again, I think is going to be really good for Geis, and that is going to be better for him long-term to stay healthy and be that RB1 for Washington football team. That's really weird to say, but now,
yeah, I mean, that is such a weird thing. I'm glad they changed their name and everything, but like, just pick a new name. Like, what are you doing? Just pick a new name. It's not that hard.
I know. We got the Seattle Kraken in a faster time than it took.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, so at the 8th round here, the quarterbacks I'm not really looking at still. I already have a tight end, so it's really just building out the rest of my roster and seeing what we have here. So I really have been. I feel like I'm going to steal your pick, but I don't know if you're ready for or thinking that he was going to make it back to you. But Tyler Boyd, I think, can just have a lot of opportunity as potentially the wide receiver 1 for Cincinnati, and depending on what AJ Green does, if he can stay healthy or whatnot. But I mean, even with Joe Burrow, if he could be what we expect him to be, even in year 1, as potentially one of the best rookie quarterbacks to come in and produce, at least that's my expectation. I think Tyler Boyd is going to be a big reason why Burrow does so well as well too. I mean, Boyd had over 1,000 yards the past 2 years. I mean, I don't know why he's an 8th round guy. Maybe it's because AJ Green is back, but I think that he's just going to be a solid PPR producer. Should, like you said, anything happen to any of my other wide receivers with COVID or anything, or if OBJ gets hurt again, or Sutton isn't really what I expected him to be with Drew Lock, I can just slide Tyler Boyd in as my wide receiver too, and be done with it. So I like him a lot there at the start of the 8th round.
Yeah, totally agree. And he was, more efficient when AJ Green was on the field a couple of years ago. I think he can still be very productive. Strong track record back to his college days. He wasn't great in his first couple of years in the pros, but this guy can play football. His long-term career back into college proves that. So I feel very confident about that. I took Cohen here because I don't feel very secure in my number 2 spot. I think Cohen had one of the quieter, 79 catch seasons or whatever he had last year that a running back has ever had because he was very inefficient. But I'm not a big David Montgomery guy, and I don't think really anybody in their offense can do what Cohen does. And then you add in Nick Foles, who is immobile, and we know immobile quarterbacks tend to dump off more. I just think Cohen's pass-catching role is very secure, and he's somebody that I like. I don't like to take a ton of different pass catchers on the same roster. I also like Nyheim Hines, but I probably wouldn't take him now that I've taken Cohen. But I like getting one of these types of guys when I've been thin at running back because I feel like I'll feel comfortable playing him as my RB2 pretty much any week.
Yeah.
And then when it swings back around, I knew both the guys behind me had QBs. I'm going to grab Josh Allen, who's
nice.
A running quarterback, another little cheat code. So I like him there.
And that opening schedule for him is beautiful. Yep. Yeah. No, I like it a lot. And I took Josh Allen in around that spot in the early 9th there. So I'm glad that you validated that pick for me in a couple mocks ago.
Yeah, nice.
Cool. So so here at the end of the 9th, this is where I'm still not looking at quarterback just yet. There's still a handful of guys that I really, really like. And maybe if something happens on the turn, I can look that way in the 10th round. But something that I've been really trying to do and trying to get myself more so to do in these later rounds after grabbing a solid starting core and roster overall is just grabbing a bunch of these backup running backs who, they might not have value whenever the starter's playing, but I'm going to know when I'm going to be able to play them. Latavius Murray is one of those guys. Chase Edmonds is one of those guys. I think Zach Moss is as well too, who has standalone value, but if Singletary goes down, that's a big time thing there. Tony Pollard's another one, Duke Johnson. So I'm actually going to take Zach Moss here just because, like I said, he has that standalone value in that Frank Gore role as, we're projecting him to be the main red zone guy, even though Singletary can definitely do that. I think that's not how the Bills want to use him, and they want to use Moss in that way. So he has that standalone value, as well as, like I said, if anything were to happen to Singletary, this is Zach Moss's backfield now. Even with your pick, Josh Allen, taking away, rushing opportunities and red zone opportunities just by scrambling, I still think that that's a insanely high rush volume offense that I kind of want a piece of. And in the 9th round, I like Zach Moss there, even though I'm not really in on him as a prospect and in the future. I'm good with him where he's at right now for redraft, and kind of in that same mold as well too. Chase Edmonds is another guy that I really, really like as well too, who I think a lot of people put Kenyon Drake's his end of season into what he's going to do this year, which is definitely within the realm of possibilities. But Chase Edmonds also didn't play for a handful of those games. He wasn't available. He was hurt. And in the games that he did play last year, he smashed and definitely is a very good athlete, very good running back. And, if anything happens to Kenyon Drake, I know right when to slide in Chase Edmonds as a high upside RB2 with RB1 upside.
Yep. Love both those guys in this range for all the reasons you said. And Lindsey and Carry On are guys I'm looking at as well. That they're gonna they're kind of similar to what you said about Moss. They're gonna have standalone roles, even though they're veterans. They're not young guys. They're gonna have standalone roles. And if something does happen to the people who came for their jobs, they would still get plenty of work. And you're getting some touches every week and somebody you can plug and play and at least get some. Maybe 8 to 10 touches at minimum, I think, for those guys, as long as they're healthy. And then you have the potential that they're the lead back. And especially in Carry-On's case, it could be, we don't know what's going to happen with the rookies, with the fact that they're not going to have a whole lot of time in the spring to show that they know all the the blitz pickups and all the things you have to know. I mean, running back's the one position that I think rookies can pick up the quickest, but Kerryon could be their number one back from week one. Probably not for the full season, but certainly a decent enough price there. But yeah, I mean, this is a great range for backs, and there's a couple more. I mean, Pollard's sticking out as the top guy here. I like him. I do like Darrell Henderson as well. But I also want to mention Christian Kirk, who I almost took over Josh Allen. I think he's wildly undervalued, and I was going to take him if he came back, but I feel pretty confident with my running back or my receivers at this point, and I want to come back to one of these backs, and I think I'm actually going to go. I'm going to go because Boston Scott's ranked kind of high here, which is kind of that's what's pulling me. I really like Boston Scott this year. I think he's got that pass catching and scoring potential that I think is indicative of big upside at the running back position. So he'll have a standalone value, like you said, with a lot of these other guys, and will also have big time upside. I think if something were to happen to Miles Sanders, who I like a lot as well, Scott would be really good. And then the other guy was, both my guys made it back, Pollard and Henderson, that I was considering. At this point, I think I'm going to say Pollard. If something happens to Zeke, he's going to be a star, I think. So that I'm just loading up on lotto tickets to a degree.
Yeah. No, this is the strategy here. I mean, we don't know if COVID is going to have some sort of impact here. These backup guys who we know are going to take over the backfields more so than, it's a lot easier to plug in Tony Pollard if something happens to Zeke than it is for, you to plug in a wide receiver 4 should something happen to a wide receiver 1 or 2 on a team, right?
Yep.
So just being able to have these guys on your rosters is so valuable. And that's why I'm just going to continue doing it, to be honest. I was kind of hoping and seeing if one of Cam or Daniel Jones was going to make it back to me at quarterback. But I'm just going to kind of keep punting that out there. I have, counting this pick, 3 picks. But I'm just going to keep going with these running backs here. And really, I mean, Nyheim Hines, you mentioned him earlier as well, too, as a guy who has that PPR upside, that standalone value as well, too. But he's not a guy that I would be targeting just because he's not going to get the volume if Jonathan Taylor or Marlon Mack go down, right? Like, he's not going to get the rushing volume to pair with that. Whereas another guy who I think would be Joshua Kelly. Should anything happen to Austin Eckler, and I think Kelly has that opportunity to take over that, what the Eckler's rushing volume last year, where Eckler's going to take Melvin Gordon's rushing volume. And I think he's going to have that opportunity out the gate versus Justin Jackson. And I love taking Joshua Kelly after Justin Jackson as well, too, because, I mean, that's the order that you're going to be taking them in anyway. But just being able to grab Kelly there, I think is nice, too. And then looking at the quarterbacks,
I can't make up my mind on those two, man. Because originally I was totally with you. Like Jackson, a lot of fantasy footballers really like Jackson because he was great at the end of 2018, plug and play guy when both Gordon and Eckler were out.
Right.
But then when Gordon held out last year, they didn't use him a lot. They used him a little bit, but they let Eckler have a lot more of the work. He's a former 7th rounder. And it was almost like, it's almost like we're a little bit higher on him in the fantasy community than the Chargers have told us that they are on him.
Right.
Because then also they come around and they take Kelly in the 3rd or the 4th round compared to Jackson, who's now a 7th rounder 3 years removed from being drafted, who hasn't really gotten the opportunities when they've been there. So it seems like the team's telling us they wanted somebody better than Jackson to fill that number 2 role. And that's why they went and got Kelly with a decent enough pick. But I'm worried about the COVID thing now, where is Kelly going to have enough practice time, or is Jackson going to be the number 2?
Right. No, yeah, I definitely understand. And that's why you see them being taken around the same range. People they're not sure. No, and I don't know the answer either. I can't tell you if it's going to be one or the other. But I'll take the cheaper guy, which is in most cases Josh Kelly. And then so I'm going to wait on quarterback here in the 13th round. We're going to see what comes back to me because I have my eye on one guy. And he's kind of buried on these rankings here. So I'm going to take another guy who's buried in running back rankings, and I don't really know why. Giovanni Bernard, who is the clear handcuff for Joe Mixon, a guy who's already stated that he might hold out. I don't know what the kind of the update or the progress is on that, if he's actually going to do that or not. But Gio is the for sure handcuff, and I don't know why anybody else they want to put in Travion, and they want to put in Rodney Anderson, and I get it, but like Gio is like the guy.
Yeah, I think he's a fine handcuff for sure. I personally prefer Darrington Evans a little bit more, who I just snapped up here, but I can totally see it. And I've always been a big fan of Bernard's skill set. And I like AJ Dillon here as well in this range when you keep adding to it. And I said I like Hines as well. And then I guess I'm going to go back. I mean, I could keep taking running backs, but I only took 4 receivers in this draft, and this is my last pick. So I'm going to go back and take well, man, I don't know receiver I would take here would crack my roster. I was thinking of N'Keal Harry. He just went. If I was going to take a receiver, it'd probably be Mike Williams. I love that you're waiting on QB as long as you are, too. I want to note that. Like, I was talking about some early QBs. I have Josh Allen 7. I thought it was fine to take him in that spot, but typically I would wait longer. I'd look for like a Stafford or a Wentz, or you can wait till super late this year. And I'm curious to know who your guy is, but there's several that I think are still on the board that I would be fine starting in week 1. But I'm going to go over to –
I'll give you my wide receiver. I like Mike Williams a lot, but Golden Tate would be the guy if you were looking at wide receivers. He would be the guy that I would take because I think, like I said with Evan Ingram and that pick, that offense can be sneaky good. And I think Golden Tate can kind of solidify himself as that 1A to Sterling Shepard's 1B. And I've talked about him, I think, the past 2 weeks on this on this show just because he's so cheap.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I'm having a hard time with that offense because there's a lot of options, and he's getting a little bit up there in age, and I'm a little concerned that he'll get enough targets. And I like Slayton a lot, and I think Shepard, if he's healthy, is going to be fine. And we talked about like an Ingram, so it's a little tougher for me. And I also just tend to skew towards younger guys when I look at these late round picks. I'm thinking breakouts, big time breakouts. I think Tate's ceiling's probably already established. But I'm gonna keep going running back here because I just don't think at this point in this type of league that I would play any of the receivers that I might draft at this point. And I'm gonna take Racquel Armstead. He's a guy that was pretty solid as a rookie, and I think Fournette's definitely going to lose work this year. We also know that Fournette's been suspended before for violating team rules, not by the league but by the team. They try to trade him this offseason. We don't know what's going to happen there. Maybe he comes out and has a great contract year, but there are scenarios where like Leonard Fournette gets benched at some point this season and Racquel Armstead gets an opportunity, and he was a pretty good prospect. So I think he's a really good one as well to stash late in draft.
Yeah. No, like I've been adding his name into that list, like I was saying, like there's like a list of these guys that to target here. And Rock Armstead is on that list. I was worried that you were going to go Anthony McFarland because he was the top name on there. And I was going to have to break out my Benny Snell knowledge on you. So I'm glad you didn't go that route. I'll talk about it with
break out the Benny Snell knowledge anyway. What do we got?
I mean, it's okay. So I'm coming from the perspective as well as a Steelers fan, right? I'm from Central Pennsylvania. That's why Penn State, Pittsburgh. So Benny Snell is the handcuff for James Conner, and I think it's pretty obvious. And Anthony McFarland is not the guy that would take over that role when anything happens to James Conner, because we already saw it last year with Snell. He was the guy that took over. It wasn't Jalen Samuels, and Snell actually got a pretty decent workload of like 16, 17 carries per game in the games whenever James Conner missed. And like he wasn't getting the passing workload, and I don't think you're getting him to take over that passing workload. But like that rushing upside, he was averaging over 10 points per game in the games that James Conner was out, which isn't like huge ceiling upside like some of the other guys on here, the handcuffs that you're drafting. But I mean, you could do a lot worse. And Anthony McFarland is definitely not going to be that guy. He's a tiny little dude, such a different skill set and type of running back that the Steelers have had over the course of like the past like decade and even longer. It was a really weird pick, especially because like Maryland guy, like I know Anthony McFarland just from watching Big Ten football and stuff. And he has upside, but like, it's not like the type of mold that I was expecting from a Steelers draft pick and for a Steelers running back. I think it's Snell.
So what do you think McFarland's role is? Just change of pace?
Yeah, I think he's completely changed. Honestly, I don't see him getting on the field at all when Connor's healthy. I think a lot of people might expect him to have some sort of a role, even with James Conner. But Conner's like a really good pass catching back. I don't know a lot of people give him credit for that.
Yeah,
I think PFF graded him as like the third best pass catching running back last year, like he's really good, and Ben likes him a lot too, which I think is really key for that offense. So I honestly, when Conner's healthy, McFarland's not on the field, and whenever Conner gets hurt, or if he gets hurt, then I think that we'll see him as kind of a pass catching role. I think they're kind of done with Jalen Samuels. So I think whatever Jalen Samuels had is what McFarland will see. I've been seeing already reports that Samuels is on the roster bubble, which makes sense because I don't really think he's all that great of a running back. And that was also a weird pick to me as well too.
Yeah, I mean that a guy who didn't really play running back in college.
Right.
He played behind Hines at NC State as like an H-back, but yeah, no, I think that's all a really interesting breakdown. I mean, my issue with Snell has been, and I do recall what you were saying, and I agree with you, he's probably the direct handcuff because he had, I think he had like 5 games of 15 plus carries or something last year.
Yeah.
But he didn't catch like any passes. Like
I think it was 2, maybe 2 or 3.
Right, it's like 2 catches. So that's the concern for me. Is like, what's the upside if that opportunity does present itself? Is like, will he be able to catch passes in a PPR league and build out an upside? But I mean, as you noted, like if he was averaging over 10 points per game, that's reasonable for me. I mean, that's not a low upside pick in the late rounds at all, especially because he's free, right? Like you don't have to draft Benny Snell. I could have taken him in the last round of the Scott Fish Bowl, and I considered him strongly, and I took Jalen Hurts instead because I'd only drafted 2 quarterbacks. But yeah, I mean, like if you're in a deep league, I'm with you, man. I think that's a reasonable late round pick.
Yeah, I took Benny Snell and Scott Fish. So
nice.
I was good with that. And I took Jalen Hurts too. I got both of them, so I was pretty happy.
Nice.
But yeah, okay. So to end out this draft here with my 13th round pick and my quarterback, I'm interested to see, do you have a guy on here that you would go for?
Did Cam go? I think Cam's probably the highest ranked QB right now. Oh no, Jared Goff is my highest ranked QB.
There it is.
Is that your pick?
That was my pick.
Yeah, Jared Goff, lowest touchdown rate I think of any QB at a certain threshold of pass attempts, and was over 5.5% each of the previous 2 years with McVay. Like, I just don't think that's going to happen again. The touchdowns are going to come back. You have all these receivers and tight end that are ranked, way up there, and for some reason Goff is this last round quarterback. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. Jim, you tell me why you like him.
No, I mean it's everything that you said. I mean that the touchdown regression is going to come for him going back up to even so just the NFL mean, if not like his previous career average as well too, of like closer to 5 or just over 5% of passes. That plus you add in the fact that I think that offense is going to be better because they saw what they need to do to win at the end of the year last year. A lot of people talk about that 12 personnel. That base offense that they went to, and Goff succeeded at the end of the year last year in that offense.
280 yards and 2 touchdowns in all 5 of those games that everyone talks about how good Higbee was. Goff, Goff every game, 280 and 2 minimum.
Yep. You throw that in there. And then it was actually just a couple of days ago, JJ Zacharyson put out a kind of a Twitter thread about a little research that he did on quarterbacks and whenever that quarterback has weapons inside the top 60 overall in ADP. And, just talked about how like those quarterbacks are generally pretty good, obviously, because we think that their wide receivers or tight ends are going to be good as well too. But the problem is that usually that comes with a high QB ADP price tag as well too. I think he said the average quarterback ADP was around 7 or 8 of the quarterbacks that fit that mold with weapons inside the top 60. And I replied back to him I said, is this good news for Jared Goff, who's consistently outside the top 15 quarterback ADP, but yet has Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods inside the first 4.5 rounds. And then you throw in Higbee as well in there in the 8th round. And he said, that would probably be a pretty easy value find for Jared Goff, and just another, checkbox in his favor. Then you look at the last thing, he plays week 1 at home against the Cowboys. So I'm pretty in on that matchup.
That's going to be a big first game. Yeah, I mean, and It's funny. He had some blow up games last year, and people kind of focus on that. But he threw for over 500 yards one time, and I don't know if a lot of people did that last year. He threw for over 400 another time, and he threw for 372 more times. I mean, that's a quarter of his games, 4 of his games where he had this 370 plus yard upside. And I don't think the Rams are going to be like super good again. They did protect him well. He actually had one of the lower sack rates in the league, which I don't think people recognize. Maybe in terms of pressures and whatnot, it wasn't as high, and we know that that offensive line isn't good. But that's why they kind of went to the 2 tight end stuff. Yeah, he only got sacked 22 times. I mean, that's a very, very low rate. I just couldn't agree with you more. I think he's probably the best bet. And the other reason he goes late is everybody's in love with rushing quarterbacks now, right? Because last year, the top 7, I think it was, all ran for at least like 250 yards or something. But that was the first year since I think it's either 2002 or 2003. It was like a back in like the Rich Gannon era. It's the first year since then that there wasn't at least one top 3 quarterback that didn't run for 100 yards. So at least one immobile top 3 quarterback. I mean, running is a fantastic boost, but everyone's chasing it now in 2020 drafts because we've made that super clear in the fantasy community that rushing upside for quarterbacks is huge, but it's not completely necessary. And Jared Goff's the kind of guy that has the passing volume and weapons and upside that he could have like a Jameis Winston type here, although Winston's not a good example because he can rush. But, Ben Roethlisberger from 2018 is probably one of the better examples of an immobile quarterback recently having a big season. He could have that type of passing upside.
Yeah. I thought Matt Ryan as well, too, that right. Super Bowl year. That type of upside, I think, is in Jared Goff's range of opportunity. So, I mean, I don't really know why he's so far down. I think maybe it's because of last year and just like people remember the beginning more so than the end. I don't really know.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. So what a powerful way to end the episode.
A lot of Jared Goff love.
I love it. So, I mean, Ben, thank you so much for joining me today and coming on here and drafting these 13 rounds with me, going through some of your process, your player evaluations and your picks and stuff. It was really fun for me, and I hope it was for you too. So, I mean, just give a shout out to some of your work. Let the people know where they can find you. Any other stuff that you might be working on or is going to be dropping here or just dropped, anything like that. Let the people know.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's just over at CBS Sports, the Fantasy Football Today podcast. I'm on that several times a week. And you can just type in, I guess, CBS Sports Ben Gretch and find my articles. I'm writing a lot, so there's not really anything that I have to plug. But, yeah, I'm not hard to find. Yeah,
awesome. So, I mean, to all you people watching the Twitter, Ben's Twitter, Yards Per Gretch, is going to be in the Twitter script or the YouTube description as well too. So you can definitely find him there if you're not already following him. If you're following me, I don't know why you're not following Ben. So that's where we're at. But to everybody watching, thank you so much for watching and tuning in. Please make sure, if you're not already, to subscribe to the DLF YouTube channel. Ring that notifications bell as well to get access to all of our YouTube channel videos, more of these drafting lessons videos, Mailbag, the ADP show, the Commissioner Chronicles, Mannequin Shield, the new series that we just have been dropping, 2 episodes already in. So please subscribe, ring the notifications bell, like this video, and drop a comment down below if you agree or disagree with any of Ben or I's picks. Want to leave a comment about questions, trade questions, dynasty stuff. We're all about that, and you can hit us up in the comments. So again, thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch you again next week with another episode of Drafting Lessons. See ya.